The 1992 Indianapolis 500 is one you've either heard of as the most boring race or the greatest ever. Most fans either hate it or they love it, and there's no real in between. But this video isn't about me telling you whether or not this is a good or a bad race. I'll leave that for you to decide. Besides, I already made a video on which race I think is the best. Now sit back and enjoy while I tell you the story of the closest finish in Indy history. A busy offseason began at the end of the 1991 PPG IndyCar World Series season, as the biggest announcement was the return of Ford. The Ford Cosworth XB was introduced and quickly became the engine of choice, as they became the power plant for Newman-Haas Racing and Chip Ganassi Racing. After much fanfare of a pending retirement in 1991, AJ Foyt said the hell with it and returned to the cockpit, racing in the 1992 Daytona 500 and would attempt to make his 35th consecutive Indianapolis 500 start. Also on the topic of not retiring, if you watched my video from the 89 500, you'd remember me mentioning Pat Patrick giving his team away to Chip Ganassi and Roger Penske. Well, that still happened, but guess what? Pat Patrick couldn't stay away and came back to form another team called, you guessed it, Patrick Racing. Patrick took over the upstart Alfa Romeo team and had another freaking trade with Penske. So the Miller Brewing Company used to be owned by Philip Morris, who you might know as the people who also own Marlboro. Basically, Penske said, thanks for Fittipaldi and Marlboro, here, I'll give you Miller and let you run Unser Sr. at the 500-mile races. So fast forward to 92, Danny Sullivan was Patrick Racing's driver in 91, but for 92, Sullivan moved to Gallus Craco Racing in a swapping of rides with Bobby Rahal. It doesn't end there, as over the offseason, Patrick Racing was facing financial and legal issues regarding the Alfa Romeo engine. Chevrolet refused to give Patrick Racing engines due to rumors about Chevrolet giving Alfa Romeo engines to use in the past. So, to ensure Rahal would not be using an uncompetitive engine, Patrick sold the team to Rahal and his new partner, Carl Hogan, to complete their new team called Rahal Hogan Racing, which featured key personnel from Patrick Racing. This is not the last you'll hear of Pat Patrick either. He honestly deserves his own episode. Coming into the month, USAC did implement some rule changes, such as the pit lane closing once a yellow came out, and for the first time ever, a 100-mile-per-hour pit speed limit was enforced. Now, if you didn't already know, the month of May looked a lot different back then than it does today. The schedule would start with 7 days of practice, then the first weekend of qualifications, with the first day of the first weekend being known as what we know today as Pole Day. On the first day of qualifying, rain kept the cars off track until noon, and qualifications didn't begin until 4 p.m. Arie Luyendyk was the first car out, and he did not disappoint, setting a one-lap track record as well as a record 4-lap average. Among the drivers securing their spot before the 6 o'clock gun were Bobby Rahal, Emerson Fittipaldi, rookie Paul Tracy, Unser Jr., and Scott Goodyear. At 5:34 p.m., Roberto Guerrero would set single-lap track records on all 4 of his laps to make him the pole sitter and the new track record holder. Day 2 of qualifying began with a continuation of pole qualifying due to the early morning rain the day before. The only threat, really, to Guerrero's pole was his teammate Jim Crawford, and after engine issues in the morning, he was unable to complete a run, and Roberto Guerrero would be officially the pole sitter for the race. In the 80s and 90s, the chances of getting injured in a crash were much higher than they are today. This was seen earlier in the week on Wednesday as defending champion Rick Mears had a water leak over the rear wheels, leading to a scary crash in Turn 2. Mears would walk away with a minor foot fracture and an injury to his wrist. This was not the end of scary accidents in the month, as former Formula One world champion Nelson Piquet was attempting to compete in his first 500. Before he made it to qualifying, on Friday, his car made a complete spin, causing him to hit the wall head-on. Piquet suffered major injuries to both his legs and was immediately admitted for surgery. It would take Piquet nearly a year of rehab to get back in shape. The worst, however, was yet to come. Friday, March 15th, 1992, the month took a tragic turn of events. At 4:07 p.m., rookie Jovi Marcello went low in Turn 1 and spun into the outside wall. Marcello was found unconscious and was pronounced dead at Methodist Hospital with a basal skull fracture. It was the first fatality at the Speedway in nearly 10 years. Jovi was only 27. Like always in racing, the show must go on. As Day 3 of qualifying continued on schedule, Day 3, Lynn St. James ran her fastest laps and became only the second woman to qualify for the field. Tragedy one day, triumph the next. The fourth and final day of qualifying, better known as Bump Day, was a busy one. Several cars went out early, but only Kenji Momoda and Dominic Dobson finished their runs. In his third and final attempts, Tom Sneva put his car safely in the field. At that point, the field was filled, with rookie Jimmy Vasser on the bubble. At 3:50 p.m., Gordon Johncock bumped Vasser, which put Kenji Momoda on the bubble. Vasser turned right around and requalified in a backup car. The move then would put Scott Goodyear on the bubble. The final hour, after showing promise during practice, Didier Thay's third and final qualifying attempt ended with a blown engine. Likewise, Tony Bettenhausen could not get up to speed and waved off his run. With 6 minutes left until the 6 o'clock gun, Ted Prappis took to the track. He then bumped Scott Goodyear out by 8 thousandths of a second. Johnny Rutherford then made one last futile attempt to qualify, but was once again too slow to bump his way in. Kenji Momoda, Tony Bettenhausen Jr., Didier Thay, Mark Dismore, Johnny Parsons, Johnny Rutherford, and Scott Goodyear all made qualifying attempts but failed to make the race. During the week, Walker Racing announced that Scott Goodyear would take teammate Mike Groff's spot in the race, as Goodyear was the team's full season entrant. However, the car would have to start 33rd place.
Start is a tense moment for each of these crews. Just before the start, John Paul's crew had the cowling off the top of his engine. All the work done on the cars could be erased in a second. Each of these cars have been fully torn down during the past week and reassembled. It seems more common at Indianapolis than any other place that a car will fail to start, especially considering the crisp, cold day here. Lynn St. James, Mario Andretti all concentrate. There was much speculation over the nature of the command that might be given to start the engines as we look at pole sitter Roberto Guerrero.
Besides the finish, the 1992 Indy 500 will always be remembered for three things: the Andretti curse, how cold it was, and how the cold contributed to crash after crash after crash. The race would see four Andrettis compete. Along with Mario Andretti would be his son Michael, his other son Jeff, and nephew John. Everything appeared to be going well for the Andrettis until lap 84, when Mario wrecked hard in turn 4, resulting in him breaking some toes. Then things would get even worse on lap 115, when Jeff Andretti would break a wheel hub in turn 2. It would take almost 18 minutes to extricate Jeff from the car due to the severity of his leg injuries. Despite having seen both his father and brother suffer accidents leading them to the hospital, Michael soldiered on and continued to dominate the race. The reason for the abundance of accidents was due to unseasonal-like temperatures, with a wind chill being as low as 28 degrees, leading to difficulty to get heat in the tires. Accidents began before the race even started, with pole sitter Roberto Guerrero heartbreakingly spinning on the pace laps, ending his race before it even started. The second victim to cold tires would be Tom Sneva on lap 11. After that, a long green flag run would end after Gordon Johncock blew an engine, and only laps later, the next victim would be Philippe Gachet, who spun and ended up in the path of Stan Fox. Not long after that, Jim Crawford would spin in turn 1, collecting Rick Mears. Also collected by the incident was Mears' teammate, Emerson Fittipaldi. Unknown at the time, this would be the last time Mears would compete in a 500 after announcing his retirement at the Penske Christmas party later that year. Next, Mario Andretti would have his incident that we've already discussed, and laps after that, Scott Braden and Paul Tracy both blew engines on lap 94 and 97. After, Brian Bonner would lose control and spin on lap 110, and only 5 laps after Bonner spun was where Jeff Andretti would have his crash. From lap 62 to 122, there were only 9 laps of green flag, with 8 cautions slowing the race down for almost 90 minutes. With only 17 cars remaining, with only 6 on the lead lap, Michael Andretti was not slowing down. Determined to finally accomplish victory at Indianapolis, Michael would stretch his lead to 23 seconds, lapping up to third place, leading a race high of 160 laps. With 12 laps to go, despite the trouble his family had been in early in the race, Michael looked destined for victory until 30 miles from victory, his fuel pump failed. In one of the most heartbreaking moments in 500 history, Michael had driven 189 perfect laps, and to no fault of his own, he would finish 13th place. Heartbreak for one, hope for the next, as this would give another driver trying to add to the family legacy, but this time it would be an Unser, as Unser Jr. would inherit the lead. However, once again, it would not be easy, as Scott Goodyear, who was bumped and out of the race just a week earlier, had a chip on his shoulder and was in second, chasing Little Al for the win. The duel would last 7 laps, as Unser Jr. would try to hold off Goodyear. With 4 to go, Unser had a narrow 3/10 gap. Coming to the final lap, Goodyear was oh so close. The two zigged and zagged down the straightaways, Unser trying to lose the draft with Goodyear trying to catch it. Little Al came oh so close in '89, but the finish would end at a green, and Unser Jr. was an Indianapolis 500 champion with the closest finish in 500 history by 4 thousandths of a second. A record that has stood for almost 30 years, making this one of the most memorable finishes. Other keynotes after this race is, as mentioned before, this would be the final start for Rick Mears, but also AJ Foyt, as he would try and fail to qualify for the race the next year in 1993. The only Andretti to finish out of the 4 was John, who would finish 8th. As for Michael Andretti, this would be his last 500 for Newman Haas at least until 1995, as in '93 he'd leave and join McLaren in Formula 1, making us wonder whether or not he could have came back and won in '93. The only finishing rookie was Lynn St. James, making her the first woman to win the Rookie of the Year. Whether or not you think the 1992 500 was a cold, boring wreckfest saved by a good finish, or the greatest race of all time, there is certainly no doubt that it is one of the most memorable races in history.
Like there sounds like there's some tears in your voice right now.
Well, you just don't know what Indy means.
This has been Racing Nation TV, and I will see you in the next video.